Welcome back to my classroom. This is Missy or Miss Escubius here. It's so nice to see you again. And today we're going to pick back up where we left off reading The Twits by Roald Dahl. So last time we heard about all those silly, nasty tricks that Mr. and Mrs. Twit played on each other. And the most recent one is that Mr. Twit has convinced Mrs. Twit that she is shrinking and she needs to be stretched out. So the 3 chapters I'm going to read today are going to be talking about stretching Mrs. Twit. Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. Just picture what he's going to do to her right now. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. He then tied Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied around her neck, some under her arms, some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 colored balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel I'm stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can!" cried Mrs. Twit. "They're stretching me like mad!" He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upward by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. Oh my goodness gracious, look at that picture. Can you imagine being stretched like that? "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye for me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Oh no. Our next chapter is called Mrs. Twit Goes Ballooning Up. "There's enough pull here to take me to the moon," Mrs. Twit cried out. "To take you to the moon?" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh, dear me, no." "We most certainly wouldn't," cried Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit, and with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankles to the iron ring. She went up like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds, she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below, looking up. "What a pretty sight!" he said to himself. "How lovely all those balloons look in the sky! And what a marvelous bit of luck for me! At last the old hog is lost and gone forever! Well, I guess he got even, didn't he? My goodness, poor Mrs. Twit! Yikes! Our last chapter is called Mrs. Twit Goes Ballooning Down. Oh, good. Let's see what happens. Mrs. Twit may have been ugly, and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up there in the sky, she had a bright idea. "If I can get rid of some of these balloons," she said to herself, "I will stop going up and start to come down." She began biting through the strings that held the balloons to her wrists and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through a string and let the balloon float away, the upward pull got less, and her rate of climb slowed down. That means she's not going quite as high as fast as she was. It's starting to slow down. When she had bitten through 20 strings, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. She bit through one more string. Very, very slowly, she began to float downward. It was a calm day. There was no wind at all, and because of this, Mrs. Twit had gone absolutely straight up. She now began to come absolutely straight down. As she floated gently down, Mrs. Twit's petticoat billowed out like a parachute, showing her long knickers. It was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary old woman in the sky. And there's her picture where she's coming back down to her little home over here. I hope you enjoyed those silly chapters of the Twits. Next chapter is called Mr. Twit Gets a Horrid Shock. So I wonder what Mrs. Twit is going to do to get back at him now. Oh my goodness. If you'd like to do our writing extension today, you can write about stretching Mrs. Twit. Mr. Twit used balloons and an iron weight to stretch Mrs. Twit. Can you think of some different ways that he could have stretched her? So instead of using balloons and the iron weight to make her stretch her body because she thought she was shrinking, what are some other creative, nasty, clever ideas that you can come up with that could stretch Mrs. Twit? Be creative. Don't forget to illustrate your writing, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time to keep reading about the Twits. Bye!